Welcome back to Fragments of History. Today, we're diving into 50 surprising facts you probably didn't know about World War II. Ready? Let's begin. 1. Nearly 90% of Germany's total military effort between 1941 and 1944 was focused on the Eastern Front. Almost every available division, tank and aircraft was sent east to fight the Soviet Union. This front consumed most of Germany's manpower and fuel, becoming the deadliest battlefield in human history, a front so vast that even victory often felt like defeat. 2. Germany lost over 4.5 million soldiers on the Eastern Front, killed, wounded, or missing in action. To compare, losses on all other fronts combined barely reached 1 million. The Eastern Campaign was a grinding war of attrition, fought in freezing temperatures and endless mud, where starvation, disease, and exhaustion killed almost as many as enemy bullets. 3. During the Battle of Stalingrad, the average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier was just 24 hours. New recruits were sent directly into the inferno, often unarmed and told to take weapons from the dead. Officers rarely survived longer than 3 days. The city became a symbol of hell on earth and the turning point of the war. 4. For every American soldier killed fighting Germany, around 80 Soviet soldiers died on the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union bore the heaviest losses of all, with entire generations wiped out. Despite unimaginable suffering, their resistance turned the tide against Nazi Germany and paved the way for the Allied victory. 5. In Poland, 1 in 5 people died during the war, around 20% of the entire population. Poland endured occupation by both Germany and the Soviet Union, serving as the center of the Holocaust. Cities were leveled, families destroyed, and its culture nearly erased, yet the nation endured. 6. The average American soldier stood 1.73 meters tall and weighed around 65 kilograms. The German soldier averaged 67 kilograms, while the Japanese soldier was smaller, about 1.61 meters and 58 kilograms. Physical size mattered little, though. Morale, terrain, and supply often decided who lived or died. 7. The Allies created a so-called ghost army, a secret unit of artists, sound engineers, and illusionists. Using inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, and loudspeakers, they tricked the Germans into believing massive armies were gathering where none existed, one of the most successful deception campaigns in military history. 8. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States produced over 297,000 military aircraft, outpacing Germany and Japan combined. American factories worked 24 hours a day, symbolizing the industrial might that would ultimately win the war. At its peak, one plane was rolling off assembly lines every 5 minutes. 9. Germany's Panzer IV was its most common tank, with about 25,000 built. It served from the invasion of Poland to the fall of Berlin. Constantly upgraded, it represented the backbone of the German armored divisions, though by 1944 it was hopelessly outmatched by newer Allied tanks. 10. The B-24 Liberator bomber contained over 1.5 million individual parts. Crews operated in freezing, unpressurized cabins, facing anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters. Despite its flaws, it became one of the most widely used bombers in the war, and one of the deadliest. 11. To shoot down a single German fighter plane, the U.S. 8th Air Force fired an average of 12,700 bullets. The skies over Europe were brutal, thousands of airmen were lost, and the chances of surviving 25 missions were slim. Air combat was as much about endurance as accuracy. 12. During the Battle of Midway in June 1942, the U.S. Navy destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in just 10 minutes. This single engagement turned the tide of the Pacific War, crippling Japan's offensive capabilities and proving that air power had permanently changed naval warfare. 13. Canada, often overlooked, built over 15,000 military trucks during the war, more than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. These vehicles became the workhorses of the Allied armies, moving troops, fuel, and supplies across continents. It was an industrial feat that helped secure victory. 14. In the Pacific, some American soldiers committed grim acts by taking Japanese soldiers' ears as trophies. These disturbing practices reflected the intense hatred and dehumanization on both sides. War pushed ordinary men into moral darkness few could ever escape. 15. Winston Churchill wrote more than 3,000 speeches, letters, and documents during the war. His powerful oratory kept Britain's morale alive during its darkest hours. Behind the defiant words was a man plagued by exhaustion and doubt, yet he never showed it to the public. 16. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima killed around 140,000 people, and Nagasaki claimed another 74,000 3 days later. The devastation was beyond comprehension. Cities turned to ash in seconds. It ended the war, but also marked the beginning of the nuclear age. 17. In Greece, about 80% of the Jewish population was murdered by the Nazis, the highest percentage in Europe. Communities that had existed for thousands of years were wiped from the map, their culture and language nearly lost forever. 18. Over 3.4 million tons of bombs were dropped during World War II. The Allies' bombing campaigns reshaped entire cities, leaving scars still visible today. Many of those bombs remain buried, occasionally discovered even 80 years later. 19. Nearly 60% of the bombs dropped on Germany fell between September 1944 and April 1945, when the war was almost over. These raids aimed to break Germany's remaining will to fight, though civilian suffering was immense and controversial, even among Allied leaders. 20. The U.S. Navy trained dolphins to locate underwater mines in the Pacific. These intelligent animals were taught to identify explosive devices and alert human divers. A remarkable example of wartime innovation blending biology with technology. 21. Between 4 and 5 million Soviet soldiers were captured by the Germans. Most were starved, executed, or worked to death in camps. Of all the horrors of the Eastern Front, few matched the sheer cruelty of the treatment of Soviet POWs. 22. Japan managed to kill 6 civilians on U.S. soil, all victims of a balloon bomb that exploded in Oregon in May 1945. It was part of a little-known Japanese project that sent thousands of balloons across the Pacific, carried by the jet stream to strike North America. 23. Adolf Hitler used several body doubles during the war to confuse both enemies and spies. Men who resembled him were trained to mimic his speech and posture. Some historians believe at least one double may have died in his place during the final days in Berlin. 24. In 1940, an American businessman offered a $1 million reward for anyone who could capture Hitler alive. The offer, widely publicized, showed how personal the war had become. Hitler was not just a political enemy, but a symbol of pure evil. 25. Hitler survived over 40 assassination attempts. The most famous, the July 20th plot of 1944, saw a bomb explode just meters away from him. The failure of that plot led to brutal reprisals, with thousands executed in its aftermath. 26. During the Blitz over Britain, about 1 in 10 bombs failed to detonate. Over 40,000 unexploded bombs remained buried after the war, many discovered decades later. Bomb disposal units risked, and often lost, their lives defusing them. 27. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest campaign of the war, lasting from 1939 to 1945. German U-boats hunted Allied convoys across vast oceans. It was a deadly chess match of radar, sonar, and code-breaking, one that determined whether Britain would starve or survive. 28. In Burma, only 0.8% of British soldiers evacuated were removed because of battle wounds. The rest were victims of malaria, dysentery, or tropical diseases. The jungle was as lethal as the enemy, a reminder that nature itself was one of war's greatest foes. 29. The U.S. Navy had the lowest fatality rate of all American forces, about 1.5%, while the Coast Guard's was even lower at 0.8%. Despite these numbers, naval warfare was terrifying. Submarines, mines, and torpedoes could end hundreds of lives in seconds. 30. At one wartime meeting between Roosevelt, Churchill, and de Gaulle, the leaders reportedly consumed 3 cases of gin, 3 of whiskey, and 1 of cognac. Even amid global catastrophe, old world diplomacy still flowed through good food, cigars, and strong drink. 31. Between 1942 and 1944, German refineries produced only 23 million tons of fuel, while the United States produced over 600 million. Oil was the true lifeblood of war, and Germany simply didn't have enough of it to keep fighting effectively. 32. The Pentagon, opened in 1943, fed up to 55,000 people a day at just 35 cents per meal. It became the nerve center of Allied strategy, a building that symbolized America's new global role, one it still holds today. 33. Around 100,000 American soldiers deserted during the war. Of those, 49 were sentenced to death, though only 1 execution took place. Most deserters were battle-fatigued men pushed beyond their psychological limits. 34. During the Italian campaign, studies showed that in many British platoons, only 3 or 4 of 30 men actually fired their weapons in combat. Fear, confusion, and survival instincts often outweighed aggression, a truth military leaders rarely discussed. 35. Soviet pilots sometimes used a desperate tactic called ramming. When out of ammunition, they crashed their planes into German aircraft mid-air. Over 500 enemy planes were destroyed this way, proving the extreme sacrifices the Soviets were willing to make. 36. Unlike World War I, most World War II deaths were civilians, about 2/3 of the total 70 million who died. Strategic bombings, massacres, and genocide made the war not just one between armies, but one that consumed entire societies. 37. Around 5.8 million Soviet POWs were captured during the German invasion. Within 6 months, 2/3 had died. The numbers reveal the unimaginable brutality of a conflict that turned entire regions into graveyards. 38. The largest POW escape happened in Australia in 1944, when 1,104 Japanese prisoners stormed the fences of a camp at Cowra. Most were killed or captured, but it remains one of the most dramatic prison breaks in history. 39. By 1944, American pilots received about 330 hours of flight training, while German pilots got only 110 due to fuel shortages. This lack of experience severely weakened the Luftwaffe in the final years of the war. 40. To house U.S. troops in Britain, the Allies built over 400,000 prefab huts and 279,000 tents. Entire temporary towns appeared overnight, filled with young men waiting for the invasion of Normandy. 41. Advancing Allied armies in Europe consumed staggering amounts of food, about 4,000 cattle and 6.5 million dried eggs every day, along with over 1 million cigarettes. Feeding an army across a continent was a logistical miracle in itself. 42. By mid-1944, 35% of German soldiers had been wounded at least once, and 2% had been wounded 4 or more times. Medical systems struggled to cope, and many returned to battle long before they had healed. 43. During the Battle of Saipan in 1944, 8,000 Japanese soldiers committed suicide rather than surrender. The battle symbolized Japan's determination and the terrifying mindset that would lead to even bloodier fights ahead. 44. Studies of British units showed that about 4% of officer deaths were caused by friendly fire or accidents. In the chaos of war, confusion and fear made mistakes deadly, often killing men on the same side. 45. Of the 95,000 Allied POWs captured by Japan, nearly 28% died in captivity. Harsh labor, disease, and starvation were common, and survivors carried the scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. 46. In 1939, 22 people named Hitler were listed in New York's phone book. By 1945, none remained. The name had become so hated that families erased it from history to escape the stigma. 47. During the war, suicide rates in Britain dropped by 1/3. Psychologists believe the sense of unity and shared purpose during national crisis gave people strength, though rates rose again once peace returned. 48. Of the 25,000 SS officers who ran Nazi death camps, only 250 were ever tried after the war. Most lived quiet lives afterward, blending back into society, a haunting reminder of how incomplete post-war justice was. 49. The United Kingdom made its final war debt payment to the United States in December 2006, more than 60 years after the conflict ended. It was the quiet end to one of the most expensive wars in human history. 50. On the island of Tinian, several Japanese soldiers hid in the jungle for nearly 10 years after the war, unaware Japan had surrendered. When found in 1952, they still believed the emperor was waiting for orders. And that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more deep dives into history's forgotten chapters. Until next time, this is Fragments of History.